Hey everybody, CJ here. So I got some requests to do a little bit more of an in-depth look at the procedural encounter system. So to do that, I'm basically going to do kind of an overview first and then dig into the specific individual components. I should preface this and say it's a system that's very much in development. There are some things that could definitely be cleaned up and improved. Um, and hopefully at the kind of the tail end, I'll talk about kind of some of the ideas that I'm hoping to implement with it in the future. I would absolutely love if you have any ideas or suggestions on improvement. I'm really hoping to kind of get a conversation going in the comments section below. So definitely leave any of your thoughts. So with that said, let's get started. So essentially, what the encounter system is a way of streaming in content into the level and then procedurally stamping it into different locations while maintaining its spatial integrity. Um, so I'm basically creating these individual encounters in various sizes. So I've got a small encounter space and a larger encounter space. And then in the actual map, these, what I've been calling rulers, um, control where those are stamped into location. So I can change the size of those to control which encounters are being plugged into those spaces. And so all of my content, this is a test map. I'm just calling it encounter sandbox so that I can kind of work with them at will. Um, but all of the content is actually in a separate map level. So if I toggle that on and off, you'll see what's actually living in that space. And so this map is actually what would be streamed into the target map. And the way that I'm previewing that is very straightforward. What you would expect just in the map blueprint, or level blueprint, I should say. I'm just doing a begin play and loading in that streaming level. Very straightforward. So the actual individual components that are controlling this, the main thing that's doing most of the controlling is the spawn manager. It's an actor that I'm placing in the level, just one of them per map. And that's what actually controls the behavior of which encounter is being chosen and stamped to what location. So this is what actually controls the overall behavior, and depending on what information is fed to it is streaming in, kind of particular content. The other actor that is being used is this, what I've been calling the pylon, my encounter pylon. Um, and it is doing essentially double duty. I originally had two separate actors that I combined together, and that's just a kind of personal preference thing. You could set it up so that they're separate. I just thought it was easier to maintain this way. But depending on what I choose from its kind of local control, it will either be the ruler, which is the target for where the encounters are being placed, or the pylon, which is basically the anchor for the encounters, and it's kind of the center point where everything is kind of spatially related to it. So I'll get into those behavior a little bit more, like I said, a little further down the line. So first, let's jump into the spawn manager itself. So on a high level, it's very, very straightforward. I've got a little bit of debug content in here. The main controller of the randomization is the map seed, and that is just my terminology. On a per map basis, I wanted to be able to control everything from a single stream, so that if I want to randomize the encounters, I randomize the map seed in that one place, and then it will randomize all of the content in the map. So my debug is simply just doing a simple branch, if I have the debug on, it just randomizes that stream every time I play the map, so I get a different result. Otherwise, it would be up to me to randomize it in a different location depending on when I wanted that behavior. And to verify that result, I've just got a kind of a simple quick hack, which is using that map seed to create a random float from that stream and then just printing that. And that way, if I use the same stream, I'll get the same number that's printing out. And that's just a quick and dirty way of verifying that it's using that that correct root number, I should say. So next up, spawn pickups is a separate behavior I'm not going to be covering in this video. I have a slight delay. That's purely just from the way that I have set up some of the content in my map. It may not be necessary for your own setup. I just find it sometimes useful to put in that and make sure that the behavior is hooking up properly based on everything being in place and then activated. So really the randomization starts with the spawn encounters function. So in spawn encounters, it's very, very kind of simple to see. We've got the kind of initialization step, which is when we get all of the encounter locations. This is another function. And then the working is taking that same information and randomizing the encounters. So if we jump into the initialization, so when we're getting the encounter locations, we're first getting all of the actors of that Pylon class, so gathering all of the rulers, all of the Pylons, because they're all the same class, just gathering them all in that one step, and then setting that in just anything with the L underscore is a local variable, just something that I'm using within this function. So setting that all of the encounters into one array, and then looping through all of those and sorting them out. So in the actual body step, I'm using a switch, and that's based on each of the pylons is using one of the, it's using an enumerator. So I set up these basic types of things that I want. So I've got the pylon large for the large encounters, so on this end, and then associated large. I probably should rename that for clarity to like ruler large, but you get the idea. Just to control the different types, so that as I switch between those on the local actor, it will control some different behavior based on just kind of workflow and pre-visualization. And again, I'll get into the actual specifics of that when I get into that blueprint. But so based on that, I'm purely sorting out that giant group of all of them into their individual types. So I've got arrays that are based on the parent Pylon blueprint, and I'm just sorting those out by, if it's a large Pylon, add it to the large Pylon array, and so on and so forth, working down the line. And then once that's complete, just feed that out into the return node. So once that's finished gathering everything, sorting everything out, then I can actually randomize the encounters. So again, in my case, because I've got large encounters and small encounters, I just call the same function twice and then feed it different data. So this is the one that's randomizing the small encounters, and this is the one that's randomizing the large encounters, because it's being fed the associated sizes. So feeding in the pylons and the rulers for that associated size class, and then within that, just for kind of sake of cleanliness, setting a local variable for the pylons and the rulers. For safety's sake, checking and making sure that there are any rulers that need to actually receive encounters, just for cleanliness sake, avoiding errors, that kind of thing. In the actual working section, essentially it just loops through all of the encounter rulers and it grabs their location and generates a local seed for those. This is the blueprint function that I covered in the previous tutorial video. Just as a kind of a quick summation of its function, it takes in that map seed that I mentioned, that controls the overall map, and it generates a local seed for that particular actor based on its location in the map. So it takes the map seed, generates the local seed based on that. I just set a quick local seed for that. That's actually a minor mistake. I should shift that down to a local variable, but I think I just left it that way because it was it was working. So generate that local seed, and then to choose an actual index for which encounter is being chosen, I take all of the encounter pylons that are, again, controlling these encounters. I basically grab the length to figure out how many encounters I have to choose from that. I subtract 1 to just reset the index value so that it's choosing based on index, not the raw number of them. And then use that local seed that I just generated to create an integer. And that sets which index is actually which encounter is being chosen in effect. So setting that, and then from the encounter pylon, basically from the array of possibilities, choosing that index. And shift pylon is a custom event that I'll go into in a little bit. That's basically telling which pylon, so say this one is chosen, it says, hey, you need to shift all of your actors over to the target. So that's the event that actually calls to shift those over. And then once that's successfully done, it removes that chosen encounter from the list of possibilities. And that's, again, based on the that's based on the understanding that you have more encounters to choose from than you have target spots, which is a goal for me. You may want something slightly different or kind of a safety check in there, depending. So that's pretty much the high level kind of what the spawn encounters does. It gathers up all the pylons, sorts them out, and then tells the individual chosen encounters to shift over. Something that I'll probably want to do in the future in this stage is then go through and kind of do kind of a garbage collection. Any of the encounters that aren't actually kind of in use, I'll probably want to have some sort of behavior to destroy those actors, or turn them off in some manner so that I'm not draining any resources. But as this is just kind of getting up and running, I haven't had that problem yet. Whew, a lot of talking. I apologize if I'm going over this too fast. I will try to clarify anything, but I'm also trying to be brief and economical with everyone's time. So next up is the pylons themselves. So first and foremost, this is kind of this may not be at all necessary for you in the construction script. This is mainly behavior that I've put together for ease of use, visualization, making sure that I'm working with the appropriate type. If you split these out to separate actors, you may not need this, so kind of take this with a grain of salt. So first up, it's just choosing what type of this actor is this going to be. Is it going to be pylon? Is it going to be ruler? And to help visualize those, I tried to associate certain colors. So if it's going to be a small ruler, it's got this yellow color for this kind of bounding area. And then if it's a pylon of that association, then it tints the arrow to that color. Same if it's large, then it's going to be red with a red arrow in the middle, just to make sure that I'm using the appropriate types and I can troubleshoot it really quick. So in the basic setup, I've just got an arrow for that pre-visualization. I've got a simple cylinder ruler object, and then a billboard, which I'll touch on in a second. But so for the pylons, they just have the arrows. So just grabbing the arrow, setting the arrow color depending on which type of pylon it is, and then just doing that kind of garbage collecting, destroying the ruler object and the billboard because they're not needed for that type. And then for the kind of more ruler-oriented ones, I basically put in one of those cylinders, scaled it out to figure out what kind of space worked for me in my gameplay, and then set that value that I thought worked here for the ruler scale, and then using that, just made a new vector to control the 3D scale of the cylinder, and just feeding that into the X and Y so that it kind of fans out in a pancake rather than growing super huge. So very straightforward. Again, for workflow sake, I wanted something transparent that was unlit, so I made a material that is transparent and has a vector parameter that's plugged into the emissive property. And then so I assign that material, I create a dynamic instance of that material so I can control it on a per actor basis. And then based on what ruler type that is, I tint it so that it will match up. So the small encounters are the yellow, red, green, so on and so forth. And this behavior, I'll just touch on briefly. I'm not actually using it currently, but I'm thinking of possibly being able to rotate and also offset the center of the encounter. Might be a nice way of creating just a little bit more kind of micro variation in the encounter. So this is simply a setup that I actually grabbed from some of the demo content, that it basically creates a vector in a particular kind of direction and then rotates that vector and randomizes its length. And basically what that means is that you get this dinosaur head is the decal that it's moving around, or sorry, the billboard. And so as you're moving it around, you get a randomized location in a certain radius, so that's a good fit for the individual encounters. So that would randomize the location, and then I could make a rotator if I wanted to rotate it in a random direction. But like I said, not using that yet, but it's a possibility. So then moving on to the event graph. This is very, very simple and straightforward. This is the shift event that I mentioned earlier that will actually move the actors to their target location. So based on the location that they're being fed from the spawn manager will basically say, okay, this is going to be the ruler where you're being sent to, so it'll tell, say, this pylon, that's the target location where you're going to be moving to. So it sets that, does a quick safety check to make sure that there are actually actors that are associated with that pylon that need to be moved. Again, just trying to be clean and avoid errors. And also just to mention quickly, right now I'm doing this kind of in a brute force method, just adding individual elements and then using the the picker to pick individual actors. I'm hoping to improve this in the future with something a little bit more automated, but given the scale I'm working with right now, it's not too bad. But that's how I'm building those actors that actually need to be shifted so that each pylon knows what it actually needs to move. So does that safety check. If there's no actors, just print a little log to say that. Print one if it's successful. And then just do a loop through each of those actors. And what the loop does is it takes the location of the pylon itself. It takes the location of the ruler, which is the destination that it got fed. It adds those two together and then subtracts the actor's location from that destination, so it preserves that offset, and then just sets the new location based on that. And the only real trick here, which I honestly don't know if it is actually a huge effect, but I'm just basing this off of the tooltip text. I flagged it to teleport because I guess if you don't flag that, then it will actually inherit some of the physics velocity that would be based on that movement, even though it happens pretty instantaneously. And I just figured that would be safer in terms of not having physical actors flying off the map or you're jiggling in place or whatever. So set that flag for safety's sake, unless someone finds out otherwise. So then once that's completed, that's basically the bulk of the behavior. Very, very simple, very easy. In my case, I have actors that are basing certain effects or behaviors on their connections to each other. And so I was running into behavior where if I just initialized those actors, they would sometimes have the incorrect locations because they would move and then turn on, and then what they were pointing to would move, or so on and so forth. So in my case, I just did another loop through those actors, and because those actors, if they're electronic, I'm using a blueprint interface to control that behavior. So if it has an interface, then I use a custom event to actually turn them on. But that may not be at all necessary for you, depending on your setup. So I realized that was super duper fast. Hopefully it was clear. I was trying to be as concise as possible. In terms of things that I'm hoping to do in the future, I'm really hoping to implement an idea that was kind of discussed in some of the No Man's Sky, not coverage, I think it was an art talk on some of the GDC Vault. But one of the ideas that they came up with, which I think is fantastic, is basically the idea of tagging your content with certain keywords and using that to control the spawning behavior. So in their case, because they're creating entire planets, that's a much more kind of necessary thing to make sure that things are cohesive and they're not really noisy. In my case, it would be really helpful to, like, for example, right now, just in terms of raw numbers, I've got these 3 encounters lined up. I've got 1 enemy encounter and then 2 dweller encounters. So in terms of just the raw percentages, I'm much more likely to see some of the dweller encounters. But if I have keywords that are associated with that, I can use that to start shifting some of the behavior and make sure that the content that's coming into the map is not only appropriate for the gameplay, but also for what kind of content I want to see in the map. So even down to things like, this is a kind of a nice kind of neutral camp. This could probably go anywhere, so I could just tag that as kind of being a dweller camp. But this camp, for example, it's more kind of production, like they're drying out materials. These are kind of mud daub, like charcoal ovens. So I can definitely see certain locations that wouldn't be appropriate. So maybe I would want to flag those with a particular keyword so that they're showing up in areas that makes sense. Or if I've got a particular brand of encounter that I think is going to be a lot harder, I can flag that in a particular way so that that level of difficulty is showing up at a certain point. And that really gives kind of a higher level fidelity to the content that you're pulling in, and make sure that everything is kind of seated appropriately and works really nicely together. So and also, like I mentioned in the previous videos, I'm using this basically to control the overall encounters. You could dig down as deep as you wanted to and use it to control literally anything. I'm not really caring what size of totem pole is created, or if particular type of cloth is hanging on the thing. So I'm fine with these being purely randomized, but I'm really hoping that as those are connecting together, I get really kind of a really nuanced and rich randomization, but one that feels really, really natural. So um, thank you again so much for tuning in. I really appreciate the interest, and the reason I put together this video in the first place was really because you guys reached out and said what kind of stuff you wanted to see. So please continue to do that, and let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm still learning and still trying to improve the stuff as much as possible. So let me know what you think. And thank you so much for tuning in. I hope to see you again here soon. Bye.